drills. It's your cloverleaf pattern that you set up on the ice that allows the player to get a bunch of repetitions with their tight turn where they're using a game applicable skill in a non-game applicable situation. That cloverleaf pattern is not getting replicated ever in a game, but the skills within that cloverleaf pattern are. Then when we move on to our patterning stage, this is where we're creating drill patterns and movements that are no longer drills, but take place in specific areas of the ice where they may also take place in the game. So from our tight turn perspective, maybe it's a player making their way up the wall, mimicking like they're turning off pressure, getting to the net and taking a shot on net. This is kind of where we really want to reinforce the where, the how, and the when. It's putting a little bit of additional purpose behind our practice. It's where our practice to game transfer becomes a little bit more recognizable. And then we have our stress, and we have two types of stress. We have coach or controlled stress, and then we have chaotic stress. So I'm doing that same player climbing the wall, turning off pressure, trying to get to net for a shot, but I'm putting some passive pressure on him with a coach. And then eventually we're getting to a spot where it's chaotic, where they're having a player actually trying to make sure that they do not succeed applying live pressure. And basically what we want to see is this is where we figure out if a skill becomes translatable. If they can demonstrate a similar level of competency with or without stress, okay, now we believe it has the opportunity to actually translate into a game. So this is taken out of Austin Keating's file. A couple of years ago, he was having some issues escaping pressure off of a tight turn. So that became our large focus. Then when we broke it down through that skill acquisition process, we noticed that he had a noted deficiency on his outside edge and lack of ankle flexion. So that became our focus. So we isolated it. We did a simple figure eight edge work pattern where we just isolated the outside edge. Where are you comfortable? Where are you able to be balanced? Where are you able to be powerful? Where are you able to be mobile on those outside edges? Develop that understanding for him through this figure eight edge work drill and a series of other edge isolations. Then we put it into a sequence. We just did a simple figure eight pattern, but we talked about all the segments that go into in the order of operations that has to happen for him to be as efficient and effective coming out of that figure eight pattern. Then we actually patterned it. So we started creating a bunch of different game recognizable situations where we talked about, okay, the mechanics he needs to make, how does he get his ice back, how does he get into good scoring areas, or how does he actually escape his pressure? But we're creating game recognizable situations. So in this case, we had him enter the zone, make a delay, and then explode to the middle of the ice for a shot on net. Then we did that same drill with coach applying a little bit of passive pressure. And then we eventually did it where we had a teammate being his opponent, trying to make sure that when he makes that tight turn, he can't get the space. And if he can't, he's having to make another tight turn to try to escape that pressure. So I'm a visual learner, as I'm sure a lot of you guys are here. So I'm going to show you guys a shooting example. This is from Kyle Maximovich, who we picked up at the deadline a couple of years ago. With us, he was playing a specific part of the power play where we were trying to get pucks to him. We were trying to get looks for him to get a shot on net from around the top of the circle area. But we're finding that while he's getting a lot of looks and opportunities, there wasn't as much going through, or he wasn't quite as successful as we wanted it to be. So we felt that if we could add a little bit of deception with his hands, a little bit of deception with his feet, that could translate into a game. So I'll play it out and I'll talk over it as we go here. So we started off here with just a basic isolation where we're trying to add deception with our hands by extending our hands away from our body. We're kicking our inside leg back to clear additional space for our hands and to allow for what we would call a stride shot, so he can actually shoot with his feet in motion. Then after this, we got into what we would call sequencing. This could be called patterning, but it's not the specific pattern we would want in the game, but basically focusing on his feet being somewhat in motion as he goes to shoot, extending his hands, pulling around the screen, firing on net. Then the specific pattern, it'd be a face-off one back, a D to D pass, and then a shot. And then we eventually put some stress. We had a moving target coming at him, so we had to change the cadence with his feet, get his timing down, pull around the screen, and fire on net. And then we had some game application. So a couple days later, situation was replicated. He was able to get puck through and score a goal. So they don't always work out like that. That's kind of your golden one. But if you follow the process throughout, you should be able to replicate some good results. So just to summarize the technical skill development side of things, it's broken down into 4 steps: isolation, sequencing, patterning, and stress. So isolation is segments to build a skill. So like we talked about, is it your edge work, is it your hand positioning, your head positioning, where you focus on just a small specific segment. Then we have sequencing. So we're combining all those sequences for a game applicable skill, just not in necessarily a game applicable area. We're focusing on repetition and developing technique. And then we're putting the when and the where in. We're getting into patterning. We're showing them where this can be used on the ice, how to increase their effectiveness with it. And then we're adding the stress. We're trying to make sure that's translatable by applying pressure where they now feel comfortable using it in a game. So all these steps have fairly important roles. And basically this whole thing is, we call it the re-engineering of skill, and we're breaking a full skill down into its most simplistic segments or a noted deficiency, and then we're trying to build it back up. And what I find, or what we find, is kind of the best part of this is we're making things manageable. Kyle Maximovich is a very, very good player, but if I'm telling him that right away we're going to do the moving screen, you're going to drag, you're going to fire on net, he's going to get shots through. He's going to do a fairly good job of it, but we don't really get to key in on certain areas. He's got a lot of noise, a lot of elements going on, and he doesn't really get to get hyper focused on something. So by getting hyper focused on that drag and fire, hyper focused on the footwork, hyper focused on the catch, and then adding in the change of cadence with the screen coming at him, it just allows him the opportunity to gain confidence and competency as he builds that skill up. So I find that the start to the end process becomes a lot easier because you break it down into manageable segments, and then we're just kind of meshing it all together. That being said, it's not always an A to Z process. I showed the Keating example and the Maximovich example as if we went isolation, sequencing, patterning, and stress. But sometimes you'll go in isolation, you'll get into sequencing, and then you'll notice, oh, he actually needs to work on this. So let's go back and let's isolate this element. And then let's get back into our sequencing. Or sometimes, especially I find in the tactical standpoint, you might skip the sequencing step and just get straight into patterning. The big thing for this, we talked about the purpose and the pathway. Just make sure whenever you're teaching a skill, you're defining your purpose. It's not just a tight turn drill. It's what are we actually trying to focus on? So when we're preparing our lesson plan, we want to work on change of direction. Great. But what specifically is it? Is the way we enter turn, the way we exit turns, try and define a smaller focus. And this process can be used whether it's an individual athlete or for a group. Okay, then we have our tactical skill development. So tactical skill development is the isolation of direct game situational opportunities applicable in all coaches' systems and tactical plans. This will include play away from the puck, on the puck, as well as consideration given to situations to exploit goalie and opponent tendencies. So basically it places an emphasis on dictating the play and controlling your controllables. It's the next step from the how and the when. And it includes, but isn't limited to, separation skating, your second action, your shot routes, your ability to create space or counter bumps, which is what we're going to get into. But with tactical skill, the important thing for us is we show, we don't tell. It's the old adage of every single coach tells their players that we want them to work hard, but what does working hard mean? What does working hard for you as a coach mean? Yeah, they can come off the ice, they can be sweating a ton, but are they doing what you want them to do on 50-50 pucks? Are they doing what you want them to do in front of the net? It's showing them the process and not just telling them about the process. So for us, we break our tactical skills down into pillars. And Norm is actually going to go quite in depth, I believe, with these in future weeks. So I'm just going to touch on a tiny subcategory, but this from a couple of years ago, but we have creating space for yourself and others, our give and go game, our zone entry and our zone exit, our second actions around the net to generate offense, and our ability to close quickly. What's our second quick? What's our ability to take away time and space? So these are all great things. So once again, we want to tell our players that we want you to create space for yourself and others. That's awesome. That's a great concept to have, but we need to show them how you do it. We can't just say work a give and go game. We got to show them how to do it. So it's a matter of defining your values and then breaking them down to show them what they actually are. So we're going to touch on just a subcategory of creating space for yourself and others. But as you can see, what we consider creating space for ourselves and others is broken down into even more than this, but boxing in and out, the use of separation skating, your ability to cut hands, your ability to be good with your second action, to be able to win 50-50 puck battles, be good with your stick, make use of the counter bump, don't have reactive, but have proactive puck protection. And we define what that means to our players so that they understand what our values are and what we're looking for from them. So we're going to touch on just counter bumps today. So I'll show you a little bit how you can use that skill acquisition process that we're talking about, and then kind of take things from there. So here we're working on a counter bump, and we're starting off with an isolation. So normally when you'd be bumping like this, you'd have a puck on your stick, but we're just trying to isolate the ability to get your hips in front of that player, give them a tiny bump, and then take your ice back. That was what we would call impact counter bump, where there's space between the shoulders. This is now established contact. We're already leaning on the player, looking to push off them, and then looking to reestablish your hip position and your ice. So getting hips in front of player, turning off, reestablishing hip position and ice. Then we're getting into the patterning phase here. So we skip the sequencing like I talked about, and we put the puck on their stick, and they're working on a specific game pattern that is recognizable. We're telling them the when and the where that this could go about being used. And then we're going to add in some additional stress. So here's their secondary pressure that would come when you would normally escape pressure in a game. So they're leaning on that player, they're giving a tiny little counter bump, and then they're escaping that second layer of pressure. And so, pause that there. So for us, it's important that we expose our players to all the different situations that these things could happen. And this is just one situation where a counter bump could happen. So we also go, skips here, to the D zone. So working our way through the same kind of process of establishing hip position and giving a tiny little bit of a bump. And basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to dictate the terms of contact. We decide when contact happens, and if we're able to do that, we're going to be more happy with the result. We're not chasing the play, we're driving the direction of it. And so in this position, in this one, we're stressing position over possession. You get your hips in front of that player, and then we work on getting possession of puck. We're not reaching for pucks. We're getting our hips in front. It's just a tiny little bump with our butt, and then we're getting to that puck and we're escaping our pressure. Now we're getting into the patterning stage, something that's more recognizable of when you win that 50-50 puck, you give that bump. Now we're looking to cut the net, and then we're looking to make our outlet out of the zone. And so here's a couple NHL and also OHL examples. And basically, like I said, we want to try and show our athletes all the situations that these can take place, whether it's making our way up the wall, whether it's in zone. And they can be highlight reel little counter bumps like this, where you're using their butt, you're actually knocking that player off their feet, and then you're able to escape pressure. Or another little big one here. Or they can be a little bit less impactful, where we're just trying to use our body for a moment to create a little bit of additional space for ourselves so we can allow our skill to come through. That we've created a tiny bit of space for ourselves, a little bit of a mismatch with a defenseman like this right here, just gives a tiny little bit of the bump. It gives him enough time to use his skill to make a play. Sticks his butt out, tiny little bump, enough space to go about making a play. So same thing here, Zuccarello, just tiny little bump, creates enough space for himself to make a play and get a shot on net. So what's that mean for you guys as coaches? So elements of a tactical skill development plan. So values and team identity. What's your team identity? What do you want a player in your organization to look like? And what skill does a player need to succeed in your league? So when you're trying to build your pillars, you're keeping those things in mind. And then also your systems plan. What skills do your players need to succeed in your tactical system? So puck possession, puck management, huge part of today's game. So let's teach that position over possession. Let's teach that proactive instead of reactive puck protection. It's trying to figure out what are the things that you value, and then how are they broken down, and then how can we go about teaching it. Then also we want to keep in mind age and level. So what's important for development at your team's level? What's your low hanging fruit? So if we're a team that's just started contact hockey, or a year into contact hockey, maybe that counter bump is a good skill to teach them. Where maybe if we are in novice or Adam, maybe the way we're going to want to create space is through the use of a little bit of deception with our feet, teaching a jab step on a puck retrieval. Ultimately, though, we want to create accountability and ownership, both among our staff and our players. So we want to try to legitimize the process by making sure everyone understands it, whether you're myself on the skills team or you're at the top, you're the GM. We want to make sure that everyone kind of understands our process, and we want to build a dialogue in key terms. So they know what we mean by a counter bump, or they know what we mean by a jab step, or they know what we mean by position over possession. So we're not always having to re-explain ourselves. Big thing I think is you can't just tell your players what to do. You really have to go about showing them and dive into what's the, I don't know what you call it, macro and micro level. What's the end goal, and then what are the kind of segments that help us to get there. For me and for us, it's kind of the connective tissue of your team. You might have great systems, but if you don't teach your players how to play within them, you're not going to be as successful. If we don't teach our players strategies that help them win 50-50 pucks, we don't teach our players strategies that help them create space for themselves, support their teammates, no matter what our systems are, they're not going to be as successful as they could be. So within your tactics, your systems, we need to make sure that we have good tactical skill development that can help build upon that. And then make sure that we're making time for skill every single day, regardless of the level of your players. We want to try and incorporate it into practice, maybe as actual drills, but then also into your values. So for us, we always want to hunt pucks. And what that means is a player comes in, takes a shot on net, rebound, spurs off to the corner. We want them to be kind of have muscle memory that right away you need to be going to that puck. So in our practices, that's what we do. Shot gets taken on net, right away, player needs to take a couple steps towards the puck. They don't necessarily have to track it down. They don't necessarily have to grab it and make some sort of a play, especially if that's going to kind of blow up the drill. But we want it in their mind, in their muscle memory, that shot gets taken, they get moving. So when a game that happens, they can either be that guy who gets there, that F1, or, okay, they've moved there. Okay, they see, oh, I'm F2 now. What's my role? And now I can react. Instead of waiting for the play and chasing the play, we're dictating the play. So this is just a kind of a way that you could go about incorporating a little bit of tactical skill development. This is actually from the World Junior bubble here. So pretty good group of players, but they're just warming up with a little bit of cutting of hands, and then they're going to get into their actual practice. But just cutting through that player's hands, working on establishing your ice, establishing your lane, and putting that opponent at a disadvantage. So just kind of summarizing things here, technical versus tactical skill development. So there's a lot of crossover between the two. I mean, skill is skill. Um, but technical to me is, or to us, is largely related to the fundamental or individually based skills. So it's your skating, your shooting, your stick handling, where your tactical is largely related to how to approach a situation strategically to be more likely to obtain a desired result or to dictate the play. So these situations typically build upon technical skills in a strategic manner to attain these results. So it's um, at the junior level, everyone should know how to take a hit. We know how to do body contact, so they have the technical skills to take or give a hit. Now we're trying to use that skill a little bit more tactically with our counter bump to create space for ourselves. Or we have the ability to make a tight turn. Okay, so let's try and use that skill tactically through the use of what we would call a jab step, where we're selling one way our tight turn, and then we're escaping pressure the other way. So it's building upon skills they kind of already have in their toolbox, but showing them another use for it or how they can use it to further their performance. So I kept mine kind of short and sweet here. So I'll summarize for you what we kind of went through. But I think it's important as coach, we want to understand and we want to appeal to our players. We want to know the who, or we want to tell them the who, the what, the when, the why, the where, and the how. But we don't want to give them information overload. We want to make sure any information we give to our athlete has value to them, and we're removing too much background noise so they can be hyper focused on what we want them to be. We want to make sure that we have a purpose in the pathway. So every time we step on the ice, we want to try and define our focus, and we want to try and define our steps to achieve that goal. So for me, that's our skill acquisition process. For you, that might be something slightly different, but try and formulate a plan of what I want and how I get there. Technical skill development. We want to make sure it is challenging but manageable. So that's the thing for me that I think is the most important, is by breaking it down into segments, into situations. It just becomes a lot easier for that athlete to build that skill. They don't get as frustrated because it's smaller segments, and they become more confident and more competent with it because you break it down into manageable portions. On the tactical side, we want to make sure that we define and we stress our value. So what do we want as an organization? What are things that we value? We value the ability for players to create space. We want players to hunt pucks. So we're coming up with a list of things that we value, and then how do we go about conditioning our athletes to actually get there? And the big thing is you got to show the players. You can't just tell them. We can't just tell them we want them to create space. We got to let them hear that that's what we want. We got to show them through video, NHL examples of it going on, and then we want to give them the opportunity to feel what it feels like when they're not successful, what it feels like when they are successful. And then ultimately, whether it's grassroots, high performance, whatever it may be, it needs to be incorporated into daily practice. It can be incorporated into daily practice through the hunting of pucks like we talk about within our drills, or something like I showed you with the cutting hands warm up there with Team Canada, where it actually becomes a drill. But we want to try and make sure that it's not something that's taught and just understood and then not stressed. We want to make sure it gets repeated, even if it's through something simple like a warm up. It gives them okay, I know I need to make use of this within my games. So like I said, mine was a little short and sweet there. Didn't want to keep you guys too long, but if anyone has any questions now, feel free to go ahead and ask.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that, Evan. We do have one question right now. Again, if you can send them in to me and I'll get them out. First one, how important is it to run through the 4 stages of a skill in a single practice versus staggering it through multiple practices? Are there pros and cons?
I would say generalizing, it depends on if it's an individual athlete. I often like to make my way through all 4 steps because you can be a little bit more focused with them. They can get a little bit more information. But generalizing, I think it's something that can be incorporated into multiple practice. It's just about defining focus and making sure that it's not just you who knows why they're focusing on it. It's the athlete itself. It's your group itself. So if we're doing edge work, what's the reason behind it? Or if we're working on that dragon fire for the shooting, what's the reason behind it? So hopefully that answers that question.
Awesome. Next one is, are you still the highest 2-foot jump in the city?
Highest 2-foot jump, and say, who's that one coming from?
Craig Hale.
Maybe. Oh, back from the Gloucester days. Yeah, I don't have that anymore. My dad bod's caught up to me, so I not getting too high off the ice when I jump anymore.
Awesome. Any other questions, guys? We don't have any other in right now. If you do have some, send them in before we get you out of here and watch the Sens game or the Habs, depending on your preference.
And feel free, my email's there if anyone has any other questions that they want to get a little bit more in depth with. Feel free to just fire me an email.
I don't see any other questions coming in. So we'll end it today. If there are questions, like we said, you can either send them in to me and I'll pass them on, or you can send it to Evan directly. His email is there. Next 2 webinars will be Norm Milley from the 67s. He'll take off or start where Evan took off here or ended. So it'll be a continuation for the next 2. Again, thanks a lot for coming out, and we'll see you guys next Thursday. Thanks a lot, Evan.
No problem. See you guys.
Hey, Jeff, I got one quick question for you.
Just give me 1 second here.